Hey everybody, welcome to SPP Dental Group's webinar for today, Friday. We are super excited to have Dr. Brian Harris with us. I am filling in for Mark Thackeray. Mark Thackeray is our resident webinar leader. He's our marketing director here at SPP Dental Partners. But I'm stepping in today mostly because I consider Dr. Brian Harris a friend and a mentor to me, and so I've been very excited to have him with us, and Mark wasn't able to be with us. So if you were expecting Mark and you're getting me, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I promise it will be a good webinar. So for most of you who are showing up on this webinar, you're probably showing up because you know who Brian Harris is and probably not me. And thus Brian doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Dr. Brian Harris is recognized as one of the nation's top cosmetic dentists. He truly is. He's an inspiring entrepreneur, leader, and mentor. He is the founder and CEO of Smile Virtual. That makes him the original virtual dentist. He pioneered the virtual consult concept to be able to break down barriers for patients to be able to connect with doctors. He is also a creator of Clean Products, very cool oral healthcare products company known for their natural ingredients and unique modern look. And of course, Dr. Brian Harris, along with his dad and brothers, created the Harris Dental brand in Phoenix, Arizona years ago, and have built that into the powerhouse that it is in Phoenix. Now, I consider Dr. Brian Harris, myself, a friend, a mentor, and a leader. So I want to welcome him into the podcast with his walk-up song today. Did you hear that? Did we get that?
I didn't get it, but I still feel.
That's so good. It's right by my mic. It's a Too Legit to Quit song.
Oh,
picked by Dr. Michael Allen. Sorry if that disappointed everybody. Man, I really wanted to have Dr. Brian Harris have a walk-up song. Welcome, Brian.
I thought it was going to be Big Pimpin' or something like that, but I'll take Too Legit to Quit. Hey, thank you, Wes, and dude, it's always good to be with you. We go way back, and it's an honor to be here today, and I hope I can maybe share a few things with your listeners that would be of value.
No, absolutely. So the topic that we want to talk about today, right, is how to add an associate to your practice. And I thought before we kind of get into that and a little bit more about you personally, where you're at now, maybe you can kind of fill us in on what a regular work week looks like right now for you today. And let's let that kind of set the stage for then after kind of how it began and how you got there. So tell us a little bit about what your work week looks like right now.
Yeah, kind of an interesting question to start off, and I think it's an awesome one because I think how you set up your week and how you manage your time is crucial for your success. So currently, I see patients Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, doing smile design cases. We start at 6:45, and then I typically go to about 4:45. We don't take a lunch; we just kind of eat on the fly as we go, and that's my patient schedule. And then I use Thursdays for working on the business. That's where when I record a lot of my virtual consults. It's also when I do things like this, and then Friday mornings will be kind of makeup time for anything I didn't get done during the week, but then also personal errands that I need to run. So and if I'm traveling or speaking on the weekend, I'll usually travel on Thursday. So it's a pretty dialed in schedule. I mean, I really tried to honor it and stick to it. And it's tempting at times to stray from that and to try to stick patients in on days that I typically don't work. But I've tried to do a good job of just truly honoring that creative time.
I wanted to start there because you said a lot of good things. And this is one of the things that you've taught me. I want to reemphasize that I met Brian probably like 2019, right? Probably 6 or 7 years ago. I was in a pretty critical time in my own career of like deciding how to implement more cosmetic dentistry in my practice, how to see more of those patients. I was in a really small practice, and you have really laid out a framework for me to get to where I wanted to go, but I didn't know how to get there, right? And so I wanted to hear what your work week is like right now, because not that everybody is trying to get to that exact same thing. Everybody has different goals, right, that they want professionally. But it's important to say what you just said in the beginning is you kind of like designed it, right? Like, this is what I want. And you had to do certain things to get there. And our conversation about adding associates in your practice is one of those critical steps, right? To be able to free up you as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, and a dad, right? To be able to do that kind of stuff. So I want to kind of picture that. Before I go into my next question, I did want to mention to everybody who's kind of joining us here, if you do have questions along the way, feel free to use the chat and I'll try to keep up on that. And if it's relevant to right then, we'll jump into it. Otherwise, we will definitely save some time for the end of the Q&A. So yeah, so you say, okay, that's where I'm at now. So now let's reverse back to you getting out of school and being an associate, right? Starting out as an associate, and kind of take us through a brief journey of getting started to where you are today, and how those steps, changed who you were, and then how you looked at running a business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up around dentistry. My dad was a dentist. He's retired now, but I grew up around dentistry, like at a really interesting time when this first cosmetic revolution like really hit, and my dad was a big part of that. In the early '90s, when things really took off in the cosmetic space, and he went on to found a couple different teaching groups and taught with some of the greats out there, and so I kind of had front row seat to this like pivot point that he made in his practice, in his life, going from a place of just going to work every day, Monday to Friday, just doing a little bit of everything, being kind of a super GP, and then him seeing something and being like, you know what, I love that. I really want to do more of that. And instead of just, thinking about it or talking about it or trying to find more of those kind of patients, he was like, you know what, no, I'm going to do that, and change the way he dressed, change the way his team dressed, changed his schedule, throughout all the amalgam, stopped doing dentures, stopped doing all the stuff that he really did not enjoy doing, and just opened up his schedule for more of these cosmetic type procedures. So I think, I had a great example early on of somebody who was able to say, you know what, this is what I do, and it's traditionally what's always been done in dentistry, but I would love to like really do more of that. So I'm just going to go and do that. And so I think that is really what prompted me to make a similar type of change in probably 2016. From 2005 to 2016, I was hustling. I started as an associate for him. My father-in-law is actually a dentist too, and I worked a couple of days for my father-in-law, and just 5 days a week, running like crazy. We grew from one location to 5 locations, and so like mid 2016, we didn't have any associates at that time, and I kind of had this moment of like, I should be happy. I'm crazy busy. We have these locations. I was making great money, but I was just fully burned out. And so I myself kind of made a same pivot. I was actually at a mastermind retreat for this business mastermind, had nothing to do with dentistry. And I saw these guys in the group, like talking about their businesses and talking about these changes they made and these risks they took. And when it came time to share my story, I was kind of dancing around the issue of what I'm doing, what I want to do. And I remember one of the guys in the group was like, Brian, you gotta stop making decisions and just decide, like, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, if you want to do more cosmetic dentistry, like, is that really what you want to do? Okay, what do you need to do first to be able to, free up some time? And I'm like, well, 3 days a week. I need to be working 3 days a week so I can work one on the business. And they really pushed me to really take that risk. And, then they said, great, put the date on your calendar when you're going to go to 3 days a week. And it was like a month out, and they're like, that's when we're starting, follow up with us at the next meeting. So it was, Wes, and I know it's kind of a long-winded answer given the story, but I feel like that's what it's like for most of us. We start somewhere, we grow, we get to a point where we're like, okay, this is great, but I don't know that I could do this forever. And you got to take a risk.
Yeah. So, we're going to come back to that point of like getting to the point of like, that's probably one of the motivating factors when we talk about like, how do you know when, when's the right time? When did you guys first, because I know when I first met you, you were running hard and heavy with like multiple locations, right? Like you had Scottsdale, you had your Phoenix, and did you have one other too?
We have Mesa, Queen Creek, and Chandler at that time.
So you had 4 locations.
5. Yeah.
And this was you and your dad running this.
Me, my dad, and Scott, my brother
Scott.
Scott. So 3 of us.
And so obviously that's one way, like if you're gonna like just be entrepreneurial and create locations, that's easy to say, how do I add an associate? Well, you can't physically be there. So I'm just gonna add an associate and I've got to go hire somebody to work the place that I can't, but we're gonna run the business. Tell me how much fun, or like, I don't want to use the word worth it because there's different values for that, but owning and running 5 locations, what was that like for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much like hype and excitement around that in today's world of like, oh, multiple locations. Let's start a lot of offices and then we'll go and sell them to big organization. And what you don't recognize, and many mentors kind of told me along the way, they're like, hey, once you get past 2 or 3, like it's really hard to keep the quality of care the same. And it was really hard to be, they were all Harris Dental, but there was 2 offices that never had a Harris doctor working there. And so it was hard to manage it all. It was hard to keep up with it all. And the crazy thing is, if you looked at overall profitability of, let's just talk, I'm not going to talk numbers, but I want to talk about profitability of what I was making just in the one practice with my dad. And then you compare that to down the road, having 5 offices, it wasn't like there was that much of an increase in take-home pay.
Yeah.
Because my time was split in more locations. We had more overhead. There was more risk. There was just a lot of craziness. And I felt that risk, I'm like, man, we got a lot on the table here. And like, you always felt like one office would be doing amazing. And then this office
for the other one
would be sinking the other ones. So stressful.
So you eventually sold those, right? Like I know a couple of doctors you sold out of that, right? And then you guys went down to just Harris Dental and you started diving deeper into virtual consults and cosmetic dentistry. And as you did that, you guys, Harris Dental, once dad stepped away, it was too big for just you and Scott to run it, right? Or were you guys running it and that's when you felt like we need to add an associate here?
Well, that's kind of what happened. So at the time when we had the individual locations, I had hired a couple really great doctors to work those that became close friends. And it kind of it ended up being one of those things where like, hey, do you want to just buy the practice? It might make more sense for you to buy it and just run it on your own. And so it's like we grew. We didn't go and sell all of them. It was like then we went and sold off each one individually to the doctors that were working for us, because what we realized is, hey, we're a lot better off being in one location and being super profitable and maximizing space and time and in that location than trying to have many. So yeah, we sold it. And then it was me and my dad and my brother Scott. And then maybe, I think it's been 10 years now, is when we added Dr. Callan to the mix, Dr. Emily Callan, who continues to work for us now.
She's been there for a long time, hasn't she? She's been great for your team.
And she was the first associate doctor that we added. And we can talk about that experience later of why it was such a great move on our part. But when my dad retired, I think that's when we realized, okay, it's time to add another one, because you grow, and with the practice, you want to continue that trajectory, right? Mm-hmm. It's each practice tells a story, and what you don't want is to see, this over the years. You just want to be able to continue to grow and see that kind of steady 5% growth year over year.
Yeah. So, you and Scott, and you've got Emily there now, right? So at Harris Dental Experience, right? Am I saying that right? It's Harris Dental Experience, right?
Harris Dental Experience. Yeah, that's the social media account that we have. But yeah, Harris Dental.
And so, and Dr. Emily's working for you now. So you have you 2 main doctors and 1 associate in your practice, right?
We have Dr. Rick Martin, who is there with us now too. So he's been there
Really?
for a little bit more than a year and a half. Yeah. So he's been great. So that's what we're running now is 4 doctors, me and my brother Scott, and then 2 associate doctors.
So cool. So that the perfect then setup is, what made you guys decide? Like, what was the other factors? Like, what were you and Scott looking at as the business owners to make the decision? Hey, Emily was already here and she probably filled in, it makes sense that dad steps away. There's so much production that needs to be done. It needed 3 doctors, right? So, so you guys are able to do that. What was the factor to now add the 4th doctor there? Like, were you guys looking at numbers? Were you looking at doctor availability? Were you looking at like, again, a mindset shift as an entrepreneur? Is like, hey, we can add another associate. I can focus. Like, what was it for you guys that made you decide to go with the next associate there?
I think it was partly, at that point, my schedule had gotten so crazy just focusing on cosmetics that I wasn't able to do exams anymore. And so then it was just Scott and Dr. Callan doing exams. And so they started to feel that pressure. But I think ultimately it goes back to, so I had lunch one time with a man named Imtiaz Manji, who is well-known in dentistry. He's done a ton with
Spear.
With Spear, and just a really sharp guy. And I remember back then we were talking about like when to add another hygienist.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, tell me about where you're at now. I'm like, well, we've had 4 hygienists for how long? 15 years. Great. How many new patients are you getting a month? 40 to 50. He's like, okay, so you've had 4 hygienists for 15 years and you're getting 50 new patients a month. Like, where are these patients going? And, because the hygiene schedule were relatively full, but what it meant was that you're bringing on new patients and then you're just churning people out on the back end. And a lot of it's just because of time, not having doctors to do more exams, but a lot of it, and the same thing kind of applies on the doctor side. If you're kind of steady and you've been doing this for this long and you've got an average of so many new patients a month, at some point, it makes sense to say, okay, let's open up some time and let's start doing some of these procedures that we're referring out, or let's start being more intentional with our exams and with what we're diagnosing. And instead of just putting watches on everything, like, let's start doing some of this dentistry. And so I think it's kind of one of those, it seems simple, but from a common sense standpoint, look at the business and say, okay, if things are going good and your schedule's full most of the time and there's not a lot of empty holes and you're getting this many new patients a month, it's like, well, there's probably room then to say, like, let's grow.
What do you think holds doctors back from making that move then? Like,
Fear.
because I think a lot of docs who probably either going to listen to this webinar or who ask the questions, like, right in our group, we've got 15 offices in SPP Dental Partners. You run an incredible mastermind, Smile Virtual Elite, that has how many doctors in that group?
It's like 30, I think 37 right now.
37 doctors that are kind of talking to each other. And I hear the associate conversation come up frequently in both of those groups, right? And so, so you said fear, right? So do you think that's the main thing that holds doctors back from making that move to just saying, no, I should just do it?
Yeah, fear. And I don't say that as like, oh, stop being a wimp, but it's more that it is that mindset of scarcity, of that fear of like, well, what I don't want to do is what I'm doing is working. And so I don't want to bring somebody on. And then what if the schedule does slow down? What if the economy slows and now I can't keep them busy? And now it becomes a financial strain for me. And, so people don't want to feel that fear. And I think the fastest way to like debunk that or to get over that, it's like in our elite meeting last year, I think we talked about it, like, hey, how many in the room have added associate? How many have added multiple? How many have ever added one and then, had the schedule really slow down and have it be this big financial, hurdle to get over? Not one. Now that doesn't mean there haven't been issues with getting along with associates or hiring the wrong one, or, that's common. But as far as like taking that leap of faith and saying, okay, I'm bringing somebody in, it's very rare that you see somebody that's like, I did that and then everything slowed down. I made a lot less money and both of our schedules were empty. It just, if the timing's right and you manage it right, I don't think that's going to happen.
I think that, yeah, that comes down to a planning thing to me and a mindset. Cause you said the words right there that everybody says to ourselves, like, well, what if this happens? You know what I mean? I always have a funny story that I think I've shared with you before. Like right as I built my brand new office, I was moving from 4 ops to 7 ops in January of 2020. And I was driving down, I think it was November, when I drove down to one of our elite meetings, and I'm driving in the car with Dr. Landon Libby. And I told him how stressed I was. I mean, I was comfortable taking on the loan and this new space, and I had all this vision and these goals, and you would help me see, like, you can build a cosmetic practice and be a good general dentist and have this whole thing working together. So I had the plan, and I said, well, what if what if I don't do as good every single month? I got such a higher expense. What if I don't do as good? And then I said, well, you know what though? Never in the history of dentistry have we ever gone to zero though. And then like 2 months later, it did happen. Like I posted an almost zero in March of 2020 after opening my space in January 2020, right? But now I've lived through that, right? You can't plan for that though, right? As soon as we say, well, what if this happens? Then you're planning for that to happen, right? Versus if you plan the other side of that, well, what if I go bigger, by adding this associate? What if I have just a little more time and instead of doing so many hygiene checks, I actually focus my ideas into marketing better, finding more implant patients, finding more comprehensive cases, doing more Invisalign, doing more of the things that I want to do. And if my mind is allowed to do that instead of constantly responding to a hygiene check, right? What if I could do that? I think that's where the adding an associate mindset starts to kind of come in and starts to free up to do that.
Yeah, can I mention something really quick? Because that thought, I don't want people to be, to get the wrong idea about that thought of like, you know, I don't want to do hygiene checks, or because it's not about that. It's not about like, I want to bring somebody in because I don't want to do that anymore. It's that feeling, and when it's happening in your practice, because you'll go into the hygiene room and you don't want to be there, and you're trying to just hurry and get out of there so you can get back to your patient. And you'll see something that maybe needs to be done, but you're like, well, if I diagnose it, then it's going to bog down my schedule, and then I can't do the stuff that I love to do. And so it's that mentality as a doctor, when you're not giving your patients the experience that they may deserve. And I think that's what it's about. It's about just that idea of like, hey, you know what? I know this isn't best for my patients, and I know that if there was another doctor here that could help share the load with me, that was learning and growing and wanting to like build themselves, they would be thrilled and excited to go in there and serve that patient, and that would be better for the patient anyway. No patient wants to see a provider that's not excited to see them. And so I think it's okay to have that mindset, and also recognize that it's a win for everybody.
Well, you just put like one thing that I think everybody should get out of this of like, well, when's the right time? That's a good time. You may not have thought about it that way, but that's like an emotional change that happens to us as dentists when it's like, man, I'm running really, really hard. Like I'm in second gear and redlining it right now, and I'm so tired. But if I downshifted to third gear, I could go faster. I could, but I can't downshift because all my energy is put in second gear right now. And so if you give yourself the space to say, you're right, my patients probably could benefit from just a little bit more attention, a little bit more concierge level care. Because that's what I had noticed is I built my practice on that. I took over for a really conservative single tooth dentist, and I've always been able to maintain that attitude with them. But there were times when I felt like I was being so rushed when it came to my basic comprehensive exams, my basic hygiene visits, right? And I didn't have the same love. Like I'm going to walk into this and we're just going to show up, and there's going to be a lot of dentistry, regardless of whether it is, there's going to be something good that's going to come out. And instead I was like, no, I got to get back to this case, and I'm stepping out and I don't have time. And that's when it started to change for me too. Like, I think that's a really good point to get out of today is like, if you're feeling that way, that's definitely an indicator. And it may not be a numbers thing. You may think like, oh, I don't know if I have the numbers to do it. It's a customer service level thing that by adding somebody who might fit your culture, you're going to add to your practice, the value of your practice from a culture standpoint by having somebody else help you out with that.
Yeah, because at the same token, I can remember back early in the first like 5 years of my career where I was excited to be in there. I wanted to go and get to know people and talk to people. I wanted to help them figure out what I could do to help them, even if it was just a simple, occlusal pit on number 30. I like that was exciting for me because I was learning, I was growing, I was in that zone. And so, there's other doctors out there that would be thrilled to step into that role.
Yeah.
And I think that's a whole different conversation that I know we'll probably get into here in a minute, of like expectations on the associate side versus expectations on the doctor side. Like what's realistic, what's fair, how should you look at all of those factors?
So, as we set up the how part of it, which we've gotten a little tidbits here, and we'll get deeper into the how. I want to share one other thought that just kind of came to my mind about like the why part of why add an associate, right? Because maybe it is and maybe it's not part of your plan as a doctor to grow to that level that you want to or have an associate. But I'm always comparing what we do as dentists and as business owners, because we're small business owners, right? And all that, like when you're running a basic general dental practice and you have 4 to 5 employees, right? Regardless of where you have 4 or 5 employees or 20 employees, the small business requires the same level of roles and seats that individuals have to do in order to make your business successful, right? You have to be good at recruiting. You have to have HR in place, compliance. You have to market like a normal small business would market to find customers, right? So maybe you do, maybe you don't. Whatever your product is that you make, right? Like, so if you run a small business and you make wood trophies, right? You got to market it, and then you actually have to go and make that product. Or maybe you just hire somebody to go make that. The thing is about as dentists is we're the manufacturers of the product that we sell. So we have to be good salespeople. We have to be good marketers. We have to do all the leadership stuff. We have to like know what's going on with billing. We have to do every single little hat sometimes in this small business, but we also have to create a really good product, right? Which is hard to do. That means you have to be a good dentist at what you're doing. Otherwise, stuff fails and then people are coming back or they leave, right? So I always set it up from a business standpoint of like, it's crazy to be a dentist. It really is like nuts, like all the stuff that we do. Whereas most people in most small businesses find the right people outside of their space to do those things for them, right? But we take it all on ourselves and then we have to be the manufacturers. And so when it comes to an associate, you kind of look at it and say like, hey, here's an opportunity for me to not do as much of the manufacturing, right? And as I grow personally as a business owner and as a leader in my practice, then I can use my ideas and my influence and what I can do as a leader to grow the other people in my business and be smart about it. And other people can help me manufacture the product that we sell, like that's kind of, I think, one of the aspects of why an associate should work in your practice. And that may not be the same for everybody, but I think when you take a step back and you look at how we run our businesses, the fact that we have to manufacture the very product that we sell and be really, really good at, and that's a stressful job. Like I'm so over, honestly, I'm 42. I've been doing this 15 years and I'm so done with class 2 composites, like on 15. Like I told my team that 3 months ago, I said, I'm going to refer out like all of them. So if you diagnose it in hygiene, I'm walking in and I'm like, great, you know what? Dr. Rux and Dr. Troy are so good at these. They are so good. And they're like, well, what? You're not good at them, Dr. Spencer? No, I can do them good, but I just don't do as many of them anymore. And Dr. Troy does a lot of these. So you know what I mean? So like, because I'm just not as passionate about what I produce. So that was another good reason to kind of have an associate there to kind of start to say, hey, what am I passionate about and what I want to make? And my associates love to do those, or at least they say they do. Right?
No, you're right. It's a tough balance. And I think the great thing is there's so many people we can look to as mentors that have done it before. And I think that's the thing is if you can look around and you say, okay, if Weston can do it, I can do it. If he can do it and he can add one and then add another one, it's like, well, I know I can at least add one. So what do I need to do to get to that point where I feel confident to make the move?
So how I got there though, and I'm going to let you tell us the how to add an associate, because I'm very specific about the how part. And so I'm going to add my part too, but you taught me it. See, that's the thing is when I was in my 4-op little dungeon upstairs in my space and I was like, hey, I'm getting pushed. I want to do more of this kind of dentistry than I want to do. I was really passionate. Like the what I wanted to do and the why I wanted to do dentistry every day was because I wanted more of that emotional connection with some of the dentistry I was doing. And that was through cosmetic dentistry. And I felt good about it and I was happy with it. And it was growing, but it was just growing inside my practice. And I was like, yeah, and then I was listening to you and I was nervous to add an associate. But I thought that was the right thing to do, and you taught me the how. So I'll see if it's kind of the same thing. But if you were today again, and as you tell doctors in my same situation or others, how do you add an associate? How do you add a new day? Like how do you create a day of dentistry when it might not exist right now in your practice?
Yeah, so I want to talk about kind of two things. Before I get to the how, I want to talk about, I talk often about the sales process in dentistry and how we focus so much on just like conversion and selling dentistry. And we never like really stop and think about it from the buyer's perspective. Like, what do they really want? And when you do that, everything changes. When you stop selling people and when you start like really serving them and just helping them get what they want, everything changes. I think the same concept applies here when adding an associate. It's like, it's always like, oh, we got to go find someone good. How do I add a good one that's going to get along with my team? It's going to do good dentistry. And I think it's really important that you stop and really think from their perspective, like what is that kind of doctor, that kind of associate, what are they really looking for? And like, you have to become that kind of owner doctor that's going to want to attract the right type of associate, because, there's some out there that are looking to just come in and produce a ton of dentistry, make a lot of money. There's some that want to be mentored. There's some that want to, be a part of something so then they could hopefully buy in down the road. There's a lot of different types of doctors out there. And, I think there's trade-offs all along the way, just like as they're looking to join an office, there's trade-offs. They may be giving up, community camaraderie with maybe a larger DSO to have more of like an intimate, like personal relationship with a well-known cosmetic dentist, and so I think that's really important to like think about that and think about maybe what they're looking for. But as far as the how and like how to do it, so let's say you do find the right person, or maybe even before that, before you go and find the right person, I think it's important that you figure out how you're going to make the shift in your practice. I think the easiest way is to go through the same process that I did and say, okay, what do I really want? Okay. If you're working 5 days a week and you want to work 3, then great. Set your schedule up to be as profitable as you can be in those 3 days a week, and then open up those other days. And maybe you just bring somebody on for those 2 days a week. But I think you sit down and make a list of, these are all the things I love doing. Mm-hmm. These are the things that I don't love, or I'm okay not doing. And then, like you said, you make that shift of, hey, starting this day, 3 months out, moving forward, this is what my schedule is going to look like. And we don't stray from that. And these 2 days, we're going to find an amazing dentist to come in and take care of our patients. And these are the procedures that they're going to focus on. So I think it's like 1, deciding, 2, pick a date, a month out, a couple months out, whatever that is, and then just block it out and make it. I mean, now it's like you stick to the schedule, and then you trust the process. You bring them in. And then I've got a lot of thoughts on how to then share that with your team, how to share it with your patients.
Because there you go. So let's do that. So I'm going to play devil's advocate as your office manager who is also in charge of your scheduling. You say, oh, so you have a new idea. Okay, thanks, Dr. Harris. You always have these new ideas that you want to bring. and this is what you want to do. But you have a lot of patients like the call for emergencies, and they want to see Dr. Harris because you started this practice, Dr. Harris. And on that day, Dr. Associate is going to be here. And what if, and you said you're going to focus on that one thing. Well, what if you're not busy doing that one thing? Can I put an emergency on your schedule? Like, what do we do?
Yeah, and I think that's up to each doctor. Usually what we did in the past was say like, hey, if it's within 48 hours, like after that 48-hour mark, anything's free game because I don't want to have an empty schedule. But I was a little bit more strict, and I said like, if that's the case, like we're still going to leave it open, because if I have an hour of open time, then I'll go and create some social media content, or I'll record a virtual consult. Like I'm really, really strict on it. But Scott, my brother Scott's a great example of, he's like, hey, if I'm here at the office, I want to be producing, I want to be seeing patients. And so after that 48-hour mark, if it's a day or 2 days before there's an empty spot, then it's free game.
That's great. I think that's an easy step into that answer, right? Is like, hey, give it a little time. So you have to have like kind of block schedule, right? Like if you're not block scheduling, you got to start block scheduling. You create the day and you say, hey, on this particular day, I'm going to do something different than I normally do, right? Like I'm used to just having whatever's in the schedule, and it's a mix of comp exams, new hygiene checks, your composites, your crowns, some of your consults for cosmetic consult or cosmetic deliveries, all that stuff. It's mixed in all over the week. And now you get really, really intentional on one specific day. This is what I want to do on this day because I love it. Like I want to do more of it. And I'm going to create a day for myself that's my ideal day. And when I do that, I'm going to put an associate on that day too. And that person's going to get a head start on doing all of the hygiene checks for me, right? So that's going to cause a little bit of strain in the hygiene room. Your hygienist is going to be like, well, they like you though, Dr. Spencer. They want to see you. Like, I know they do, but I'm not here forever. And let's start to introduce, and that's a little bit of training that has to happen. But then you're right. So what happens with that, I know what happened with me is I had this fear set in. Well, what if I have an empty day? What if I wake up like I always do and I show up to work, and I've had a couple of good associate days where I'm busy, but then I have a completely empty day one day and my associate's hopefully kind of busy and doing all the hygiene checks. What do I do then? That's one of the fear things that I dealt with, and like you said, how would you approach that? Like you're a week out, you might have an empty day and it's like, oh, what am I going to do with myself then? How would you handle that?
Yeah. So usually what we'll do is, I still try to protect that day, and I say, hey, just leave it. We're going to find a patient between now and then. Something's going to happen. And it's pretty wild how things happen, because then later
right?
afternoon, someone comes in and breaks a front tooth and, falls, hits the stairs. I mean, this just happened to me last week. So we book out a few months in advance now, but we had a patient on that's scheduled for Monday in a few days that had to push their appointment out 2 months for financial reasons. So this week, we had that opening, and you can panic about it, or you just say, okay, be on high alert. And sure enough, somebody called in, hit their front teeth on the stairs, and was looking for somebody to see him same day. And, we were able to sneak him in for kind of I just kind of built everything back up and said, hey, we can do this, but we've got to wait until Monday to do the permanent treatment. And now that spot on Monday is filled. So when the spot's open and your team knows it's open and their job is to try to fill it, all of a sudden, and then you talk about it in the morning huddle, you talk about like, hey, tomorrow we've got a spot. So then when they're in doing their cleanings, they can see something, be like, hey, actually, doctor has a spot tomorrow. If you want to get this done, we can get it done for you. So when everyone's on high alert, you'll be surprised at how much sooner it fills. And if it doesn't, then that's where you take the time, work on the business.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's happened to you, but I've had a couple of those days where I'm like, all of a sudden I feel like I've got more time. I'll go and visit with my patients like I used to. I'll spend time in hygiene, even when they don't need an exam, just to go in and say hi. And like that stuff alone goes a really long way. You don't think it does, but that goes a long way for like people referring their friends and just building relationships. And all that.
You say work on business. I'll kind of share a little bit of like what I do in that, because I've had that happen, right? Like, so I picked a day going into the associate situation. I said, okay, Thursday is going to be my cosmetic day. And what it looked like was morning cosmetic, like a 2 to 3 hour, cosmetic prep. Like I said, like what would it take me to do like an upper arch, veneers or a combination of that with a new patient cosmetic consult. And when I say cosmetic, I'm also talking about like reconstructive type stuff, things coming from specialists that are going to require front teeth, like anything that kind of fits in that zone. And then same thing in the afternoon, a consult with a delivery, or I could vice versa. But it's basically those four things, right? It's a consult, a delivery, or a prep for those types of things. And that's all that we were going to do on that day, right? And then, thanks to marketing, virtual consults were a big help for me. I would get caught up on virtual consults, or I would think of what do I need to create. So if I had an empty hole for an hour or two, suddenly I had an hour to go get in front of my phone, which I used to be insanely uncomfortable with, right? But I started like talking about a case, right? Or talking about a thing that I could put on Instagram to grow my brand of who I am and what I do. And even though I hated it, just the more I did it, I was like, who cares? I don't care if I sound like a dork or if I look like a dork. Like, I'm the only one. I think I'm the only one that thinks I'm a dork. I think everybody thinks I'm an okay guy. So like, that's just me telling myself that I'm a dork. And I started doing more of that. And then all of a sudden, when I'm posting more, my brand grows, which is what you need, right? So whether it's implants, all on X, cosmetic, Invisalign, nowadays, right? You need to be seen as an expert in this space to get referrals for those things, or to have patients seek you out for those things. And you can't be looked at as an expert if you don't have anything to show for it, right? So you got to create some of that content. So I told my team, I said, okay, tomorrow is an empty hour. And if we don't get that emergency, if we don't have anything that fills that, I'm going to be in this operatory with a ring light and recording some content. And I know it sounds dorky, but that's what I'm doing. So don't bother me for that hour. And I'm going to go do it. And I would do it, and I would just create the stuff. Or I'd call our videographer and say, hey, I've got an hour tomorrow. Can you come in and let's do some content, or we'd try to create a reel or just do something around that. So you can absolutely work on growing your brand in those times of whatever that is. And it doesn't have to be cosmetic, right? It can be whatever that one thing that you kind of picked and says, well, this is what I want to double down on, and the kind of thing that I love to do. And suddenly when you have time to create that professionalism, that image, that brand for yourself over time, give it 3-6 months, suddenly patients will start seeking you out for that, which maybe wasn't happening before.
Yeah, I agree, because what happens is the old way, or the way, the trap we get into a lot of times is you're just like, I just want to fill every day. And so you may be like a week booked out, and that like always a week booked out, always, right? And so your production, you'll still produce because you're working every day. But what happens is if you say, you know what, no, I'm only going to put this cosmetic case here, and you put that 3 weeks out or 4 weeks out, let's say it's still in the same month, well, the production's still there. So now you got like your big production days lined up, and then you can start dropping other stuff in there. And then what you see is, instead of being booked out a week in advance, but like solid with just stuff everywhere, you're booked out a month in advance with bigger holes everywhere, but the production's the same. And then in those holes, then you can fit in some of this other stuff. So it's a unique concept, and it's one that you'll struggle with at first, because it's like, well, this just doesn't make sense. If I can do this on Monday, why would I put it out next Thursday when it's my cosmetic day? And it's all just about like sticking to that schedule. And if you stick to it, you will be more profitable. Any person that I've seen go to more of a block scheduling, cut down days, it's not just like, oh, I got to keep up with my production. It's wild. You go from like 4 days a week to 3, and all of a sudden you're more profitable at 3 than you were at 4. Like, how does that make sense? It's when you're intentional about your schedule, like it will fill with more productive stuff.
So for any of those who are kind of following along, and certainly if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat about some of this, because I did struggle with this. When you taught me this, how to do it, I had so many questions. I didn't know what to do. Like, well, what about this and what about that? But I did it, Brian. Like I built Thursday that way. And to this day, that was in 2020. It's 2024. And still Thursday is my first built out cosmetic day. Right. And then it got to the point where I was like, I think I want to do another one. Right. And it was more of, this is what I want to do, whether it was kind of there or not. I wasn't really sure if there was enough to do 2 cosmetic days. Right. But I was like, that's what I want in life. So why don't I just create the thing that I want and let everything fall in place? And so I made Monday, and my Thursday associate at the time couldn't add Mondays. And I had another doctor just kind of meet with me one time. And at first I was kind of like, he's a super nice guy. I think he may be a right guy to like maybe add a day with him. But then once my mindset was made, like, yeah, I'm going to add another day. Let's do it. I knew how to do it. I added the second day. I invited him in, and I stressed about adding that second day for 6 months. Every time I thought about it, no, it can't be done. I'm not busy enough. And I don't know if this doctor what's it going to look like if I like introduce another doctor? What's that impression on my existing patients? Do they think I don't care about them anymore? He comes and he does every hygiene check on Monday. And since then, I haven't heard a word from like my hygienist. Like, we don't need you. Like, he's doing awesome. And I'm like, yes, that's so great. Like, and so now on my Thursdays and my Mondays, like I do hardly any hygiene checks, which is not what I necessarily want to do. I go and I do hygiene checks for the reason that you just said, which is like, I have a minute here and I have these great people that have been my patients for 10 plus years. I just want to go hang out with them. And sometimes I do find some dentistry with it, or I'll see them and I'll be like, and it'll be awesome. And that passion came back for doing that. And in the meantime, yeah, I'll have empty holes on Mondays and Thursdays. But I can tell you this, like we just had our best quarter ever again, and it's always it's never been this like this, but it's just been this little steady climb of collections over the years, as we've added it. And yeah, you're always afraid of the holes, but it doesn't kill you when you've put the time and the intention into building what you really want to do. And then you put a value to that, right? You charge accordingly for a good cosmetic case or a good all on X case or a good implant case, because that's what you love to do. And the people who come into you sense that passion and they'll pay you for it. Right. And so your collections go up because of that, And so anyway, I hope if anybody has any questions about how it's done, you really kind of laid the groundwork. That's how you do it. You add the day, you let the associate do a lot of hygiene checks, and you focus on what you love to do in dentistry. So you never kind of lose that passion of being the manufacturer, right? Because it's hard sometimes. I don't know if you feel this way, but as you've gotten older, do you sense that it's like, oh man, how many years physically can I prep some of these hard to get teeth, right?
I felt like that this week, dude. And I think it's not talked about often enough. But it's also, so here's like a great example. I had a crazy week, just like crazy busy week this week. And yet when I got to Wednesday, I'm like, oh, I have time tomorrow. Like I have free time that I can like breathe and get caught up and do these other things. And so it's like, you can deal with some of the craziness, but I'd much rather have it be like organized craziness than fear-based craziness of like you should get to a point within your practice where you're not having to like count up the number of new patients that you saw this month. I don't know if you ever went through that, but I'm like, my production would be low and I'd be like, wait, something's off with the marketing. I'd be counting new patients. I'd be like, well, how many which doctors got the new patients? Did I get enough? And I never felt like I was in control of my own success. I felt like I was just like hoping that the right people would come in. I was hoping that people would say yes and my schedule would fill up. And it's such a different thing than being like in control of your own success, where you say, oh, these are the days I'm going to do these things. These are the days that I'm going to work. And, I'm going to go and like build this practice around like how I want to live my life, instead of, feeling like you're never in control and always being busy, but like busy 2 days out. It doesn't make sense. A great analogy that I always have thought this. Have you ever walked into like a nice restaurant and you're like, like it's an hour and a half wait. And I'm like, dude, there's 30 tables open right now, and they're all for reservations. And for the longest time, I thought, how does that make any sense at all? Like, I'm here, I could take one of those spots, but that whole concept of like, no, those are reserved because they know like when it's reserved, they've got their set amount of money they're going to bring in for that night, and then they fill in the rest with all the stuff that comes in.
That's a
Where
great analogy.
if they were just constantly filling with whatever came in the door, it would always be full. But it would be full with just like who's making decisions, who needs stuff right now, instead of like the people that are like planning out and those are the ones coming in spending big money, big tabs, and are there for the experience. So I think anytime you have that fear, think about other businesses, look at their model and be like, okay, it makes sense. Like that's a great example of why it makes sense right there and why you should be scheduling that way.
When you bring on an associate, how important is it in the beginning to have to, set expectations? Because you talked about like listening to maybe what type of an associate you might be getting, right? Is it somebody who just maybe they don't want to own and they just want to be associate, or maybe they do want to own? Like, how important do you think is it to be able to find that out? And how do you find that out as you're kind of looking for an associate? Because it's hard to like put a resume out or put an ad out there and say, hey, I'm looking for the type of doctor who's going to buy in. You kind of get what you get, right? So how do you establish that early on with an associate, do you think?
I think you have to get really clear yourself on what this is really about, adding an associate. And I think my dad did such a great did such a great job of this when we came in. It was like he put us up on a pedestal and he was like, no, this is my son. Like, he's an awesome dentist. He's my dentist. And I'm like, dude, I've been out of school a week, so, but he was still telling people that now he's my dentist. And that's when we invested in our first CAD/CAM machine. And he bought a CEREC Red Cam and was like, you know what? I bought this, but I'm not going to use it. This is just going to be for my boys. And so then it gave us something to do within the practice that we are specialists at, that like only we did. So then he diagnosed the crown, like, hey, we can do this. And the way we've always done it, it'll take 2 visits. Or, if you schedule with my son, Dr. Brian, he's the tech genius. He has technology to get this done in 1 visit. It's pretty amazing. You'll love it when you see it. And so by always like lifting up that associate, instead of taking the mindset of, oh, finally, I have someone here, they can do all the pedo, all the dentures. When you have that mindset of like, what's best for me, then you'll find that you're going to attract, or you're going to create an associate that has that same mindset of like, what's best for me. And if you shift that to like, hey, you know what? I want to help them be successful as they possibly can, then they're going to show up differently for you, and they're going to want to make you happy. They're going to be more likely to step in and help when it's needed. So I think that's a really important part of the discussion is as you bring somebody on, don't think about how this is going to improve your life. Think about like, what's best for them, what's going to really help them be successful and feel valued.
I think you can ask that question. I think that's a great point. That came up in this morning's mastermind call that we were on with Chris, asking your team members. And so you could ask an associate that same thing, like right off the get go, like, let's say you go out to dinner, or you're talking before you've worked together. It's like, okay, what do you want right now? What do you want in 2 years? And really allow them to well, hey, I need money. Like I'm just out of school and I got 2 kids and I need money. Okay. So what is it that you want to do in my practice that does that, right? Is there something unique or something special, or what are you passionate about? And then understand what that is, and then help build them into that, right? And obviously that's going to help you as the owner too, to make sure that's a fit for you, right? Like, what do you really, really want? Instead of you saying, hey, which we joked about, and I hope it doesn't come across as like, hey, we're going to pass our associates what you don't want to do. That's not what I intend that to come off as, but more of like, Dr. Rux, when she joined my practice, she was from the same like philosophical spear trained mindset. So it was a really good fit for us, right? Like we could talk the same language when we were talking to patients, and I could easily support her and say, hey, because I knew that going in, that was the number one thing that kind of I knew about her. When Dr. Troy joined, there was like, he went through a VA program and hadn't done a lot of implants, but did a lot of good extraction, and bone graft. And I had referred all of that out of my practice for the last 5 years, right? Like, what do you want to do? Hey, I want to do that. Okay. And do you do it well? Yeah, I really love that. Cool. Like, there's room for that in my practice now. Right. And the cases that we're able to set them up and help them be a little bit busy with that, it's been so smooth and easy for me to say, hey, I don't do this, but we can do it here. And we're going to do it at a high level. And Dr. Troy can help you with that. So asking really intentionally, like, what do you want out of your year here with me? Whether it's just like, hey, I just want a place to practice and learn from a good dentist, or I do want to join a practice where there's an opportunity to be an owner in this practice. And if that's a reality, and as the owner, being completely honest with them, rather than you hear the classic story of like people like being told they could be an owner one day and, oh, next year we'll talk about it. From the get-go, being very, very open, honest about what your intentions with each other are, I think is super important.
Yeah, there's different strategies for different approaches. Like if you're a doctor looking to hire somebody on that can eventually be a partner, I remember when I first came on and was looking to buy in with my dad, the group that helped us was like, hey, you know what? Well, then I think what would be interesting is, what if we set up a separate account, and right now each month you're getting 27% of collections or whatever it was at the time. We're going to start paying you 30% or 35%. But that additional percent is just going to go over here in this holding account. And when you're ready to buy in, you'll have had money saved up, and that can be great for,
yeah, I didn't think about that.
For a down payment. So, I mean, if the strategy is bring on a partner, I mean, geez, like you can imagine if you were a doctor that really wanted to buy in with somebody and it was a good fit, that you want to work hard because that's going to go over here. That doesn't mean it's your money. It's only your money if you end up buying in, but then you have skin in the game. And it didn't cost the doctor anything more aside from just kind of building up a reserve. So that's one strategy for a buy-in partner.
Great strategy. Yeah.
And then there's other strategies for, some doctors really are still trying to figure it out. They don't know what they want to do. That they may want to buy their own practice, and they may just want to get experience. And I think that's okay too. I mean, that's just the reality that, you will lose some, and if you take good care of people, they'll stick around too.
That's really good. I'm glad you threw that in there. I hadn't thought about that little strategy there of like kind of setting that up and almost kind of like, hey, we feel good about this. Let's see where this is going. I'm going to give you a little raise here, right? But that's going to go to there. And it kind of helps them set. It doesn't have to be a big percentage, but it sets them up for that conversation when it's coming down the road of like, okay, you want to buy in? You got a little something to get started with here, which is a great plan. I know we're pushing up against the time. So I haven't seen anybody pop in the chat. We've clearly explained everything perfectly, which is exactly how you want a webinar to go. So there's, but if anybody has any questions, definitely throw it into the chat really quick. Brian, I love in this last minute here, I always love being around you because you're always kind of forward thinking in dentistry. If I was to ask you, what are you the most excited about in the next couple of years in terms of patient communication, marketing, clinical dentistry, what excites you right now about being a dentist in the next 1 to 2 years? You're always about a step ahead. I always like to find out from you what's coming next so I can get prepared.
It's a lot of pressure, man. I think we're living in like a really, really interesting time in dentistry. I think now more than ever, you have the potential to like really change people's lives and help people and build connections. Social media gives you like the tools to be able to do that. I think also, there's a shift happening within dentistry. There's a shift happening within some of the consolidation of the market. There's opportunities now. I mean, look at what you're doing, giving doctors. I had a call this week with a doctor that called me specifically about SPP and was like, hey, what do you think? What do you think about Weston's group? Should I join them? And we had a good conversation about like the benefits of aligning with the right group to help you really manage more like the business side of things and really understand that stuff. And so I think that's where it can be seen at as something that some people may be a little fearful of. I think it's actually an amazing opportunity. Look at every medical group out there right now that has amazing reputations, and you look at their business model, and it's not that different for from what you've created here. You know, you've got, whether it's a Mayo Clinic or Barrows or some of these other groups, like, you got amazing doctors, you got amazing, you know, business-led teams behind that, and the doctors are just there to take really good care of people. And so you can see it as maybe something that's a little scary, of like, oh, dentistry's changing. No, it's just the world is changing, and it's just it may be a slightly different business model than maybe what it was for my dad in many of the years he practiced. But I think finding the right partners and finding the right group to align with is huge. And so I guess I'm most excited about just the opportunity that lies out there with patients. Their dental IQ is so much greater because of social media, and their cosmetic dental IQ is significantly greater. And so you just have people that are a lot more prepared and wanting to have their smile changed, and you know, and it's just a matter of, you know, finding the right doctor. And if you can get in front of them, you can get in front of more people and let them see who you are and what you do. Like you said earlier, you know, it's a pretty cool place to be.
I appreciate you bringing that up, that future. Like I get asked that a lot. So I didn't say in the beginning, but I took on the role the last few months of being the CEO of SPP Dental Partners. And it's a role that, like, I thought about for a long, long time, because I love being a dentist, but I also love leading. Like, there's a lot of aspects I love. I've loved running and building a good culture in my small business, right? And then here's this enterprise, SPP Dental Partners, that's growing and adding partners in a space that, just like you said, like, kind of the future of dentistry. Like, everybody's asking the question of, like, well, what does partnerships and group dentistry look like over the next 10 years, right? And we see it happening all around us. And as I've talked with, you know, business owners, the thing that I've to go along with your point is, there's so many good groups out there that, one, we shouldn't be afraid of groups, right? Like, they're here. So many of our colleagues are joining groups. It's more about, like, okay, if I was to join a group, how could I leverage them to expand my business and what I want to do personally? And there's enough models out there to find that now. That's what I'm kind of excited about is, you know, there's an SPP Dental Partners model, which is like, you know, a minority share in your practice allows you to be full, you know, still the majority owner and a lot of freedom. And then there's, hey, you can sell and get a big payout now and still have some, you know, equity in a group down the road. There's like so many different models now, right? So if finding the right one, if that's where you're going, but you should be thinking to yourself, like, how do I leverage their resources? Because that's the difference, right? That's the thing about group is groups have more resources, more humans outside of your practice that can take on all those other little roles in your small business that you shouldn't have to do or pay for inside your practice. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can now, it should free up your time to be a really good manufacturer of your product. You should be a great dentist because hopefully it's freeing up a little of your time, and, like, be entrepreneurial and say, like, what are the ideas? What do I really want to do in my practice? Because now billing's outside of my practice, marketing's outside of my practice, some of the HR's outside of my practice. I get discounts on some of these other things. Like, I can leverage this group for those things and then focus on what I really want to do. And it's a different mindset for sure. Like, being a partner in a group is a total different mindset than doing it on my own, you know, 5 years ago. But yeah, it's exciting. And hopefully people see that as a good thing and not a bad thing. Cause I know typically groups or DSOs get like, it's a 4-letter word with, even though it's only 3 letters, but you know what I mean? So yeah, so that'd be my closing point about groups is, you know, leverage them to get what you want out of life. You know, that's what it should be for. Right. And so, dude, thank you so much for doing this. Like, I knew we would get on this together, and it's just like shooting the breeze with you because you're the best, man. You've been such a great mentor to me and taught me so many good things in dentistry. And I hope everybody that was here learned something about adding an associate, how to add an associate. Obviously, Brian, tell us where we can, you know, find you on Instagram or anywhere else to make sure if people want to ask you questions directly, they can get answers.
Yeah, awesome. At Dr. Brian Harris, just Dr. Brian Harris on Instagram, Facebook, and then drbrianharris.com, my website, and you can reach out to me there. But yeah, it was great to be here. You know, I'm happy to do it. You've always been a huge mentor and friend of mine too, and it was awesome. I feel like it's always good to have conversations like this, because I remember a time when I just felt stuck and I didn't have the answers, and And so hopefully your doctors see value in this.
Great. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate you. And if you're on this and you want to learn more about SPP Dental Partners, you can go to sppdental.com and answer a lot of questions about what we were just talking about in groups and how to leverage them to your benefit. So thanks, buddy. Have a great rest of your Friday, man. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.
Later.
Bye.
The webinar has ended. Thank you for joining. Goodbye.